Now we're standing beside what was Sydney's second type of electric tram car. These were the D cars. These were little single truck Californian combination cars, first placed in service in 1899, ironically enough as steam trailers, and only 25 of them were built. Just why they actually built them or that we really don't know. I guess Californian combination was all the craze at the time, and Brisbane had just placed some of this type of car in service, so I suppose Sydney thought they'd give them a bit of a burl, but they were not very successful and they saw very little use, only on the North Sydney lines as passenger cars, and were relegated fairly early into the surplus stock, where they sat languishing around the various yards and sidings until the early 1920s. Now, by the early 1920s, our road conditions had changed dramatically, and there was a considerable amount of rubbish, oil, grease, what have you, which accumulated on the tram lines, and the necessity to clean them came more into force. So they took some of these old D cars and they converted them to what became scrubber cars and renumbered them and transferred them into the service stock. So this tram here, which was 115D, became 134S, the S standing for service stock. Now these cars were altered by having water tanks fitted on the inside. You'll notice the plumbing here leading down. And between the truck, between the two wheels, they fitted these carborundum blocks, these rather house brick looking objects made out of heavy carborundum, and they were fitted into this frame. They would be pressed down onto the rail. The tram would drive along at about 5 or 6 miles an hour and would scrub the tracks clean. One of the little known uses of these scrubbers was in getting rid of the salt spray off the lines. During very heavy southerly blows, particularly in the winter months, the salt spray would come up on the Watsons Bay and Bronte lines and cause quite a bit of havoc on the tram line. These little fellas would go out early in the piece and clean the lines up, ready for traffic in the morning. Now, this particular car, and other than the rest of its class, has a little bit of a claim to fame. That is that the Eastern Suburbs Railway, when finally completed, was in such a rusty state that the Department of Railways couldn't get a return circuit for their signalling system, and they were in a bit of a dither as to how to clean the tracks. I guess they thought of sending a team of labourers out with sandpaper, but that wouldn't have been very practical, and somebody remembered that the museum had a scrubber car, so they hired this tram office and it was used to scrub the entire Eastern Suburbs Railway. So in effect, this little fella became the first electric vehicle ever to go to Bondi Junction, and it travelled over the whole of that line early in the piece. The only amendment necessary to the tram was the fitting of hooters to the front, because the staff of the day were not familiar with the tram gong and would have got run over in the dark tunnel, so we had to fit the Claxton air horns with which they were familiar. Now, all of the former passenger cars that were transferred into service stock, of course, had to have no passengers written on the front, otherwise you would have had people trying to jump on them every time they passed through one of the tram stops. Now, Sydney had possibly the largest service stock fleet of any tramway in the world. Altogether, we had 150 trams for the exclusive use of servicing the system. Of course, that's far in excess of the total number of cars on some systems around the world. But we certainly had a very, very large one, and we had a complex one, as we will see later on in our tour. We had trams of various types for various uses. But this explains the no passengers, which appeared on the former passenger car service stock vehicles.